Good morning, Vitamin. It's good to be with you on this Monday morning. And I just want to talk to you about a subject this morning is about what boat are you on? Man, we have seen unbelievable times. We're seeing the perilous times that I would have to say I've never seen in my life. And I'm sure that many of you could say the same thing. But we're in the midst of a storm. And how do we handle those storms? How do we go through the different things that we see in our life, and how do we deal with these things? I want to read a quote for you today before we jump into the Bible about what the Lord has to say about storms. But I want to read a topic about what Martin Luther King Jr. said. And he says this: "We may all have come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now." Man, isn't that true? Doesn't that describe a lot of what's happening today? And even in the time of Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, and perilous times that were happening in the 60s. I was a young boy at the time and unaware of most of the things that were going on. But today we live in the same thing, the perilous times that we see, a storm. But I want to read to you this morning out of Mark chapter 4, starting with verse 35, and it says this: "As evening came, Jesus said to the disciples, 'Let's cross to the other side of the lake.' So they took Jesus in the boat and they started out, leaving the crowds behind. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat and began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, 'Teacher, don't you care that we're going to possibly drown?' When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and he said to the waves, 'Silence, be still.' Suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, 'Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?' The disciples were absolutely terrified. 'Who is this man?' they asked each other. 'Even the winds and the waves obey him.'" See, the disciples were all in the same boat with Jesus in the midst of a storm, thinking that their lives were about to vanish in the Sea of Galilee. And yet we see in the story where we see Jesus is on the back of the boat, asleep in the midst of the storm. But he makes two remarkable things that I think today, as we look that we're all in the same boat together, same as the disciples, that the application applies for us even today. The first one is this. Point number one I want to encourage you about this is don't panic. So what was happening is the disciples were panicking in the midst of the storm. What are we going to do? And who wouldn't? In the midst of a small boat. I've seen the Sea of Galilee. It's not a big sea, or it's an oversized lake is what I would call it. But they have amazing storms that come through, and they're terrible. They'll have waves as high as 12 foot tall. And these men were facing that. But Jesus shared with them in the midst of the storms of your life, he was using the application, don't panic. So I'm going to encourage you today of what we have going on in the midst of our lives, keep focused in your faith. Faith over fear, don't panic. Number two I want to share with you this morning is hold to your faith. Live a life of faith over fear. That is what's going to get us through the storms. The midst of what is going on in the midst of our nation, the midst of what's going on within our state, and also the midst of what's going on in the communities that we live in. Having faith over fear. No greater time than this, men, is for us to be example of sharing our faith and living by our testimony, is that we know Jesus will help us in the storms of our life. We've all had them. We've all encountered them. And when I look back at the storms that I've faced in my life, I've realized that Jesus was in my boat all the time. He was helping settle in the sea, and he rebuked against the winds and the wave, and finally calm waters happened. Folks, men, I want to share with you this morning, I believe without a shadow of a doubt, is no greater times than this. Calm waters are coming. We've got to face the storm. Don't run from it. Don't jump the ship. Stay on the same boat. Jesus has got this thing, I promise you. I encourage you today. Thank you for being a part of Vital Men.